in trying to explain my journey to Islam and the work I'm currently doing in Europe, as both at a cross-cultural level and at the religious encounter with different communities, but also with the Muslim community itself, in order to develop among the Italians, and I hope also Europeans, because we are trying to open also a channel of publication in English, in order to make Europeans understand the beauty of Islam and the peaceful teaching of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him.
Yeah. How is your experience? Because I found that you have translated 60 Muslim classics, and how is your experience in the translation? What prompted you, what forced you to be a translator of these classics?
So actually, this was my personal experience even before embracing Islam, or even knowing about Islam, or being interested in Islam as a faith or strictly as a religion that would be my spiritual choice. I always noticed the lack of books and who are actually related to the real fundamental teaching of Islam. This was the issue when I was quite in my 20s, and then still until 15 years ago, this was still a problem. If in Europe you are interested in understanding about Islam for different reasons, or can be spiritual, can be strictly in relation with your work, and try to understand what about customs or religion of different communities, you have only Orientalist books. These Orientalist books are actually very, very much full of prejudice, and most of the time they are translation of other books written maybe 1 century ago. So in a different environment for different kinds of readers. Now we see that the Muslim community in Italy and in Europe grow exponentially for a lot of reasons, historical, because they are in the second, third generation, and this lack of literature, a lack of books, lack of publication, and also I would say also lack of presence in the cultural space of Europe was something that was quite heavy for Muslims themselves and for people who want to know about Islam, and they are trying to relate with Muslim in a good and balanced way. So this is the reason why that I try my best to translate these classics. So when I say the classic, I mean that the Holy Quran, and now I translate all Sahih Bukhari into Italian, and also Sahih Muslim is half of it is ready. Inshallah, it will be the publication of the last 2 volumes of Bukhari will be done after Ramadan, and also the same thing with Muslim. It is to help the Muslims themselves to have a knowledge of Islam which is quite direct to the sources of the faith. And what I noticed that when most of the time people who purchase these books or who are searching for it are Italians, or maybe wants to have a clear view about Muslim faith, so very far from some political agenda or some other distortion made from different sides. So this is the reason why I also made this first I work on the biography of the Prophet. This is the first volume, and the second volume also is on the way, and it's going to be completed. And this is before I hope before September that all these books will be on the public space. So briefly speaking, this means that it's important to fill the cultural space with very balanced books about Islam, who are not who don't have any agenda behind, and who are quite clearly explain the life of the Prophet, peace be upon him, his life and the teaching of the Holy Quran. So this is that's it. This is what actually in Italy was like among the European countries. I think we were the one were actually the one who need more about this kind of literature.
Thank you so much. And one more thing, because you wrote a biography of Prophet, especially there are a lot of other biographies. How do you see that, introducing Prophet to the European people, what will be the important things to tell in those biographies, and what was the criterion you used when we choose the stories from the life of Prophet?
So in Europe is actually when most of the people they proclaim themselves as or agnostic or atheist. There is a Christian background, which is now, if it's not anymore religious for the majority of them, is however cultural. So what I'm trying to do is first of all to reconnect. Islam teaches us that Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, is the last prophet sent by God to humanity in order to proclaim and to bring the final teaching in all its purity. But this the same teaching, so the teaching of Islam, which is self-surrender to God and acceptance of His will and connection with the Creator, is something that has been revealed in all religions. So what I'm trying to present Islam as in continuity with Judaism and Christianity. It's not like a point of rupture. It's a kind of it's a point of it's not Islam is not something who broke the chain of Semitic religion or the revelation concerned with Ibrahim, peace upon him. So what I'm trying to do is to replace Islam in a connection with not the religious history of Europe, and also historical, because as you know that Muslim has been the Islamic presence in Europe has been quite deep, more than 700 years in Spain, and there is a big connection between what were the achievements of the Islamic Muslim scholars, philosophers, and scientists who became also an heritage of Western intellectual patrimony. So this is what I'm trying to do, is to reconnect all this past history with the present, and to present Prophet Muhammad upon him as the mercy for all the worlds. So as a universal prophet, and in a continuation in relation with the previous one. And this is, I think, is a good way of approaching, because it serves of two purposes mainly. One, to make people who have got a Christian background capable to understand the life of the Prophet and to contextualize it. And if they can understand the life of the Prophet upon him from this point of view, it will be easy for them also to read the Quran, because most of the time that people with Christian background, and was also my experience in the past, they find it extremely difficult to understand the Quran, because the Quran is a very difficult, a very deep text for someone who grew in another religious environment, who are used to other different scriptures. So this is why that, for example, sometimes what I notice that most of the people actually prefer, or maybe they start reading. So see that this is the Bukhari, for example, this is 6 volume. This is in 8 volume, but we have no, this is the second one. This is what is available now. I have here, and what they are trying to do, they start with the traditions. Or, for example, here we got sometimes that they start with the Kitab al-Tawhid, and this is what I noticed from when I have the reports of the selling and distribution of these volumes. And from there, slowly they try to understand also the Holy Quran. It is a matter of trying to find a language which is still a high standard, but also common, something which makes the Holy Scripture of Islam very close to the people again. So not something which is too much exotic, too much far. So like something approachable that people may be capable to understand. Thank you.
Yeah, great. And you showed the copy of the Bukhari, especially that you brought 9 volumes in Italian. I would like to know, what were maybe the methodology, you used when you introduced Bukhari to the Europeans, because they may not be, because the Christians, they don't have this kind of experience of the Hadith, even though they are much related to the topic of the books in maybe the Quran. How you were introducing that one? Could you explain that more about this?
So actually, because that the methodology of the gospel is completely different from that one of Bukhari, because as you know that there are 4 gospels, and more or less there is no all the reference to the chains of transmissions, and there is a clear methodology that has been used by Bukhari and Muslims that sometimes can make bit difficult for people to read. To read in an easy way the book, all the hadiths. But actually there is 40 pages of introduction about the methodology of the compilation of Sahih Bukhari, and an introduction what is Sunnah, what is how to differentiate between different traditions. And there is a general explanation in order to consider what are the hadiths, how they should be read, how scholars relate to them, how was the different collection, and not only that one of Bukhari, but also which kind of methodology Bukhari used in order to determine the authenticity of the traditions. So in a way that we have got also a lot of that there are issues sometimes related to some Arabic terms in it, and for example what I'm trying to do is to put some, so you can see here, I don't think it's clear, these are all the notes. So for every hadith, especially if there is a core hadith who is a general, what I'm trying to do is I explain all the key words there. So, for example, salat, zakat, so hajj. So at the same time, I bring some Quranic verses. So I try to put to help people to read the hadith of the Prophet upon him in connection with the Holy Quran. So it would be easy for them in the future also to read the Quran on this perspective. So if there was only a translation like this of Bukhari without any introduction or without any notes, it would be quite difficult for people, I think, to understand. For example, in Kitab al-Tawhid, there are 400 notes. For example, in all these books, who have been one of the first that I translate. And this will, sometimes I put some appendix, and for example, when there is the notion of qadar that has been quite misunderstood in Europe, and then I put I put as an appendix on qadar, try to explain briefly, but in order to be quite understandable by people, what is the connection between these key words, this key teaching of Islam, and the tradition of the Prophet. And then sometimes, especially when there is a reference to the books related to fiqh, jurisprudence, that I make some some differentiation. This is mainly for Muslims, so that about different schools of law, about some issues that, but that one is mainly for Muslims. What I'm trying to introduce to non-Muslims is the way of reading both the tradition of the Prophet and the Quran in a clear way, so without having any prejudice, without having in order to facilitate it, make it easy for them, in order to facilitate and create also a ground for interreligious dialogue. Because if there is no knowledge about what people are who religious encounter. This is the reason why I also study and currently studying also Hindu scriptures. So for all the same reason, try to make easy and understandable.
That's great. That's great. And also another one, the Abdullah Yusuf Ali's classic Quran translation. It was published in 1934, and you have brought it, the original copy, as well as you have translated that into your language, Italian, you know. How was your experience, you know, because the classical English language and especially his wisdom, you know, how you were trying to make it into your own language?
So that for actually this is Yusuf Ali, the meaning of the Holy Quran in original is in 3 volumes. That is, I just reported everything, that all the text and the notes, because the notes are very peculiar, that of Yusuf Ali, because they don't only explain that the occasion of the revelation or some technical things about some tafsir, about some Arabic word or something, but there is an explanation of each surah. There is a brief summarization, and also there is some spiritual teachings in it that they are quite deep, and I think they are very important. And there are also cross references in the notes to between different surahs. And so this is a very, very long work. Actually, there's an edition of Yusuf Ali, and it was very small and very difficult to read. So what I'm trying to do is to create maybe something which is a bit more bigger in terms of size, but could be a reference while studying and reflecting about the Holy Quran. So in the Italian translation, we have got 2 volumes. This is the first one. The second one is just double, but it is in 2 volumes. And I cut some notes. But among the translation, I think the Yusuf Ali is very much open. He's not an inclusivist, not exclusivist. So for translation doesn't have any exclusivist attitude, but it's very inclusive. So the language is mild, because and also because Muslim know, especially Arabs, that is this is their language. Arabic, in one word, they have a world of meanings, and this is the reason why that sometimes it's difficult already to translate an Arabic text, and to imagine how it could be difficult to translate the Holy Quran. So if we don't give that impression, that nuisance of depth, and this important how wide have the context of the Quranic revelation and the importance of each Arabic word, and it's not explained in the notes. It will, I think, a translation of the Quran will not only is not faithful to the text, but it betrays the real meaning. So Muslims know that the Quran cannot be translated; it can only be interpreted. So this means that it's a continuous struggle of reaching, getting close to the real meaning of the text. And I think that I translated the Quran, because sometimes if some verses also I went and see how others other scholars translated how especially some references how has been also translated in English or in Italian or French. So I went also sometimes in some cases I just went and looked to other translation too in order to be as much as faithful as possible. But the more I study the Holy Quran, more I understand they cannot be translated. They cannot be understood fully without a knowledge of Arabic. But a translation like that of Yusuf Ali is the first step. So without this step, I think it's very difficult for people to enter in the Holy Text. Of course, that I think what we need also especially in European language, especially in Italian, because as far as I know, there is nothing of this kind. We need a tafsir, so we need a real tafsir of the Holy Quran. We need a real explanation of the surahs. We need a very, very deep study on each surah of the Holy Quran. So it will be, I think, the next step that I will try to do through the classical, the classical tafsir. I will try to make something, a compendium of these things. So in order to go a bit further in this study.
That's great, and remarkable. Especially you are working on now the first Latin translation of Quran. It was published in 1143, I think, long back. How is that experience? Reworking on this Latin translation of Quran. Could you please explain?
Yes. Yes, as I started, this is the first actually translation of the Holy Quran into Latin, and it was actually made for a purpose to study Islam, but in order to, of course, the purpose of the person, Peter the Venerable, who commissioned this translation, it was to actually start a dialogue with Muslims. Of course, their aims was that they were trying to convert them, because in the Middle Age there was still the Crusade, there was the time of the Reconquista, was still an issue, a political issue among the communities. But it's remarkable the fact that differently from other scholars or religious authorities of that time, he tried the path of dialogue, instead the path of arms, that it was actually common and much more widely understood among also normal Christian and also the hierarchy. And sadly, for a long time, this translation was quite neglected. Was neglected because nobody was actually interested in the path of dialogue, and the knowledge of Islam at that time was extremely crooked. It was extremely, there were some, it was very difficult to understand from which texts these people were taking the information that then they were reporting on their work. For example, that this Peter the Venerable, the one who commissioned it, because he did not know Arabic, but he went to Spain to commission the translation of the Holy Quran, and he wrote like an open letter to Muslims, and he wrote something about Islam, and also translate that one. This was it is the first time that this work has been translated to Italian, because it was left for centuries only in Latin, and actually that one is completed, but is for specialists. But it's very interesting to see then how from this, for this philologists or people who are a bit more interested in history, from where he took the information that he was reporting in his books, in these open letters that he wrote to Muslims, that he never reached Muslims themselves because they didn't know Latin. But it was a very, very interesting operation that it was done that time when actually he was the only one who was ready to do it. Of course, it's the translation has important scholar, American scholar of Latin. He underlined that this translation was very much not very far from the reality of the Quran. So the surahs are mixed, and then there is a problem of arrangement of different texts. The verses are much more, because sometimes the translator cut one verse is cut into parts. But the interest is in the fact that how the Western scholars were trying to approach Islam, because at that time they started the process of reconquista of the Spanish territories by the Christian kings, and so it seemed that through this Quran translation, and also the works, the books written based on it, they were trying to regain the spiritual power on the Christian who converted to Islam. This is, according to historians, was the purpose of the Latin translation at that time. But now, in our time, I think to see and study this translation is important, because it shows us which were the misunderstanding about Islam that the people of Middle Age had, with all their they got a lot of they didn't have the facilities that people have now, that also the exchange of information was very, very difficult among scholars. There was the barrier of the Arabic, so it was not something that it was easy to deal, but still they tried this path. And now that my work on this Latin Quran is at the level of language, so how Arabic can be reported into, be translated into Latin, what is the difference between why Latin translation is very much prosaic, different from, because it's the nature of the Latin of the time, and actually why there is this approach to the teaching of the Quran and the life of the Prophet. So this is the main difference. I want to try to understand what brought the scholars to have this kind of misunderstanding, because sometimes it's not only a political issue there. I think it's also misunderstanding due to the Latin Christianity of that time. I think there is also a spiritual reason, or an issue related to different teaching, or a different way of approaching spirituality and the religion between the two communities at that time. So it will be, I think, the work. So
yeah. One more question related to the Europe, because you have brought a lot of books into Italian, especially Islamic teachings and text. So I'm wondering, how was the condition of the Italian language? How many written texts were there on Islam in Italian before you bring all these things?
There were not much. They were not doing by Muslim. So Muslims, so there was not making an Islamic environment. So it's not means that only Muslims they got the right to deal with their own literary religious heritage. But it's something different to see when there is few books. There are very few books, and these few books are actually rooted in some political understanding of Islam, or very much detrimental of the life of the Prophet, peace be upon him, or they seem to be quite incapable to understand the relation between Islam and the previous revealed religion. So there was actually, among the publication, when I repeat, there were not much, and then actually they were quite outdated. So they were made in also 1 century ago, sometimes even the beginning of 20th century. the language was very old, so was sometimes very awkward. So only for specialists who wanted to maybe study an aspect of Muslim civilization, but in a very narrow perspective. So what I'm trying to do is to create, as I said before, a space where there is actually Islam, a space in which is Islam can be part of other religious and cultural tradition of Europe. So it's not something any more sectorial. It's not something any culturally marginalized. So it's an operation that gives to Islam the space, the enough space to be part of European what is the European cultural milieu without any problem.
That's great. So one more thing, could you give some more insight on that book you wrote in 2019, the non-Muslim religious communities in the Muslim world? Yes. Could you cite some of the examples of those kind of communities?
Oh yes, this is actually an historical, very much. It started from the tradition of the Prophet upon him, and they finished with the end of the Ottoman Empire. So say that there was for a long time, especially in Europe, but in Italy mainly, a kind of issues related to the fact that the Muslims, they don't respect. They were not respecting religious freedom. They were not respecting the autonomy of religious minorities and so on. The nature of the poll tax, and that's it. Jizya, that's it. I try to clarify it. So because most of the accusation against Islam or Muslim policy of that time were actually mirrored what was the situation of the Christian world at the time at the Middle Age. So what I'm trying to say is that most of we should read what I'm trying to demonstrate through some historical examples, that we cannot read what was the past condition of the world with the modern notion of citizenship. So there was not something known as citizenship at that time. So the people were the main identity mark of the people were not the fact that they belonged to a nation. So the fact that they were Italian, they were or I don't know, German, or from another part of the world. But religion was the identity mark of every individual. So this means that it was quite clear that the differentiation between the individuals and the communities was made on the base of religion. And the fact that a Muslim government, Islamic government of that time, that actually is still the case, as we see that in all the Muslim world, I always saw, especially in the Arab world, I saw churches. I don't see Christian. I see Christian actually living in a normal life with all the rights respected. But especially that time where they were, for example, in Europe, there was the general law that a population should follow the religion of their king, or that there was no freedom of religion in that sense. The conversion has been of most of the conversion of Christian lands has been done both by missionaries who were actually in a way of helping people to get out of paganism, because in Rome and the center of the empire, it was much more civilized. But more that you went on the north, there were very much uncivilized tribes who were very deeply pagan. And it went between two ways, both by teaching, try to do the missionaries, but most of the time there was also an act of a decision of the political power to. There was no admission of another religion different. This is from Christianity, or a kind of view of Christianity, and this was quite. This was true both in the western part and in the eastern, so means Byzantium and the territories under its control. This is the reason why actually when Muslim against the Islamic government went and conquered all these territories, there was no attempt to mass conversions, but there was actually a respect of religious identities. So this was for a long time. That a part of the book is dedicated to Islamization of this land. So that I try to explain that how it happened, how long it took, and it was a very slow process. So it did not involve any kind of neither brutal force, neither a violent act of the government, the Arab government of that time, to force the non-Muslim to embrace Islam. Yeah. And also that try to make people understand what is the nature of this tax paid by non-Muslims. And this was something for two reasons. One, because as Muslims, they are bound to pay zakat, and then not people from the other communities are bound to pay that tax. Then and then there is the military protections. So the military protections that gave by Muslims to the communities under their government has been always source of security for Christians and Jewish communities as well. And if we think about the persecution that has to face, for example, both Muslims and Jewish people in Spain, when there was after the Reconquista, when the Muslims completely lost the political power on Andalusia, and we see what was the political approach of religious tolerance of all the Arab kings. It means that it could be, you could see the difference. So, and this to clarify and to see actually what was the issue and what was the political nature of the persecutions. And for example, there is a whole part dedicated to what happened to when started the persecution, for example, of Copts in Egypt at the time of. And was most of the time related to the attempt of the Christian kings to have spies in the land itself, or to bring these Christian communities, which they got as frictions in the past, because their Christology was different from that one of Catholics. But in order to use some of the exponent of the religious authorities of the minorities living in Muslim countries, in order to create issues in the government, and then in order to create some political unrest. So the book is quite a bit long, I think around 300 pages. I don't know if I have it here. I think yeah. It up. But it explains very well, and with the proclamation of Turkish Republic and the end of the Ottoman Empire. So I think it will be quite useful for someone who wants to read, to have a knowledge, historical knowledge about what was the real Muslim policy in different parts of the Islamic Empire through the centuries, and in order not to confound it with the history, that is history of Christianity, that most of the time that the Christian powers they had this approach of this very strong identitarian approach in their politics. So a political means a political unity should pass through the religious unity, and this was not the case for the Islamic empire. When there was the unity of the empire was did not request necessarily religious unity or religious identitarian politics, and that is this is very modern. Actually, this is quite modern, and if you see that the West reached this point after centuries of wars, if you think about the wars of 30 years, and how much the Europe was shaken deeply by the conflict between Catholic and Protestants, and you see so the difference. So it's not something past a judgment because we cannot be the lawyer of the past, but this is still again to open a door, to open a window to a clear understanding of what history is. So what and why. So from such an extent, or from a perspective, we will see that the approach of Muslim was very much modern compared to that one of other civilization in the same field.
Yeah, it's very relevant, because these days how minorities were living in Muslim countries. And I found that you also have done a lot of works on intercultural and interreligious bridging of the communities, especially your book on brief history of Christianity, that I think that's very relevant in Italian. And also I found you also translated Bhagavad Gita. When we go into the Mughals and earlier Indian rulers, they even considered the Hindus as the people of the book, according to them, Rajaputras and all, So how was the experience when you translated Gita? And do you feel that's as compared to the other books?
Yes, of course, that it takes for me a bit long time and a bit a way of changing perspective when you read actually Indian scriptures, because especially Hindu scripture are they got a different approach, and which is very different from the Semitic one. That if Islam was much easier for me to understand, in Hinduism it takes much more an effort to enter in the mentality in order to enter in the text. But in a way that I can find that Hinduism has been is in Gita, or has been actually in the work of some men of wisdom who wrote about it, or also in the Upanishad, because I also translate the core of the Upanishad and also translated that the book which is the core of Upanishad, in which I try to read everything together. So this is the Gita, and I'm trying to see. Okay. This is the essence, the essence of Upanishad, and this work, and actually this is Anmokdeshra Shatakam of Srinarayana Guru, and also now I'm going to publish also Darshanamala, which is Isra masterpiece. And how I approach Hinduism? I approach Hinduism as from the philosophical side and the spiritual side. So it is difficult to approach it as we do with Christianity, Judaism. It's because it's another tradition. But I think we can find in Upanishad, in Gita also, what we can find is a deep spiritual teaching. This spiritual teaching that it is that points towards a kind of relation between human being and a spiritual power, because the main issue that I think someone who belongs to a Semitic tradition find the relation with maybe Hinduism, if it's not properly understood, especially when it is Upanishad is the case, and we don't go to the maybe popular religion, which is something different, is the fact that there is a difference between a spiritual entity and the personal God. This is the two things I personally find a bit difficult to deal and enter in the discourse. But if we try to avoid this issue, which is actually very deep, I think it requires a lot of study, a lot of much more knowledge of the text that I still don't have, but I hope to have in the future, inshallah. But if we get in through the door of spirituality, it is we can find a common ground. So a common ground, because this is I think the teaching of Hinduism about non-violence, about respecting the creation, respecting the animal kingdom. So all the natural worlds, all the self, sometimes also the way of self-restraint, or actually it is something that can be shared as an example of enlightenment of humanity. So I think that when there is an attempt to have a dialogue with other communities, we should always try to find what is common. So what united common humanity for the benefit of the spiritual development of an individual, and also the spiritual development of one community in respect to the others. So the Quran is clear about it. Everyone has got a Sharia, and we give a Sharia a path, which is not sometimes in the Western. The West people confront they don't understand very well the difference between Sharia and fiqh. They think that Sharia is jurisprudence, but Sharia is a spiritual path that can be expressed, can lead the human being to the full development of her qualities and features as given by God. So if we start from that verse of the Quran, we see that in every part there is a Sharia. In every part there is an attempt to spiritual fulfillment, a spiritual development of humanity. Then, of course, among Hinduism is very much philosophical. In order to understand the Hindu scripture, you need a philosophical training. This is the reason why that I find it more approachable due to the personal studies and my mental asset. But I think that it is a way. So if because we should see which is the aim of this cross-cultural encounter. There must be peace, respect, building a good society, a balanced society, a society based on mutual understanding, the dialogue, in order to promote what is the human well-being. So this is, I think, the meaning of tolerance and acceptance. And yes, I think that we can, if we are based on on Upanishad, of the deep teachings of the great gurus, I think Hinduism can be part of our dialogue, and we can have a very good relation with the religious Hindu background, that we can have a very good exchange, which can be at the philosophical, spiritual level. So
yeah,
it depends all on the intention.
It's really remarkable to hear from you, and especially your works on Abdullah Yusuf Ali and then Iqbal, and come to the Gita, Raja Ram Mohan Rai and Srinarayana Guru, and you have translated a lot of poems and other things because
ourselves, but to be very lenient towards others, following the Son of the Prophet, peace be upon him.
Thank you so much. It was remarkable to hear from you, especially your work in Italy, bringing Islamic literature to Italian, and especially translating the classical and also the other religious wisdoms to the Italian. Hope we will have more chances together. I thank you, and also Mr. Latif for arranging this session, and hope we'll have more